Police officers were shot outside the Ferguson police station. Let's listen.
Ferguson called a code 1000, which means the closest 25 cars that could be available to assist them at 8:27. Approximately 150 protesters were located in the roadway, 15 police officers on the scene. At 9 o'clock, Ferguson makes one arrest of a protester in the roadway on the charges of failure to comply, being in the roadway, endangering the welfare of a child, and resisting or interfering with arrest. Protesters leave the roadway. At 10 o'clock, due to the amount of people that are in the roadway, another code 1000, an additional 25 officers come in. Eventually we end up with 69 police officers that respond. At 10:30, Ferguson makes an additional arrest of a protester in the roadway, and at 11:15 they make a final arrest. Now at this point, we are beginning to see the crowd begin to diminish. And in fact, by about 1:15 till midnight, we're beginning to see not only the crowd beginning to leave, but we're also seeing the police officers that are going to be leaving. At least some of them. Now I would imagine we had 75 protesters, probably 40 police officers left at this time. So we're thinking that it's thinning out. At 12 a.m., we hear 3 or 4 shots ring out. Some of you have seen that on the media. These are shots that aren't in the air, they're not in the ground. One way you can tell is when you listen to the audio, you can actually hear those shots singing. Those shots immediately strike 2 officers that are standing next to each other. But I'd like to underscore that these officers are also standing in a line of about at least 20 to 25 officers. So we have a group of officers standing there. It's very evident that we have a group of officers standing there. And the Webster Groves officer is shot right here at the high point of your cheek, right under the right eye, and the bullet lodges right behind his ear. And that bullet is still with him. He's going to have further evaluation to figure out what they're going to do with that round. The St. Louis County officer was struck right here on the shoulder, and the bullet came out the middle of his right back, between his scapula and his spine. Now, fortunately, with both officers, we don't have any remarkable long-term injuries. In other words, it wasn't in somebody's brain or heart or anything like this. But you need to know these 2 officers took a very hard hit. I mean, any time that you're shot in the face and have a bullet lodged in your head, any time that you have a through-and-through wound where the bullet enters your shoulder and comes out the middle of your right back, those are hard hits. So we're lucky, by God's grace, we didn't lose 2 officers last night. So one of the things that I've talked about is that we do need to understand as a community, and we certainly understand it as a police department and as law enforcement, that we have an obligation to make sure that folks that want to express their First Amendment rights have the ability to do that. But when you look at the tenor of at least some of the people that are involved in the protest or civil unrest, it at times can be very troubling. And it's difficult for the officers to discern within a crowd of folks that are perhaps there for the right reason exactly who's doing what. And one of the problems we have is, similar to last night, I would have to imagine that these protesters were among the shooters that shot at the police officers. And for the police officers that are standing there and really don't have the ability at nighttime to understand what they're looking at, it's dark, there's a whole lot of people out there, there's a lot of noise, it's very difficult for the officers to really understand what they're looking at the time, and really to be able to evaluate any type of threats. So, you know, I would just tell you that you need to understand that. I think it's a miracle that we haven't had any instances similar to this over the summer and fall. With the amount of gunfire that we would hear, that I personally heard last summer and fall, I think it's a miracle we haven't had something like this happen. And I think we're very fortunate that that has happened. I'd also like to point out that my officers tell me that when this happened, when they heard the shots and when they heard the bullets singing past, that they saw muzzle flashes. But these muzzle flashes were probably about 125 yards away. Many officers drew their weapons, but no officers fired. But what if we're in a situation to where it's 25 or 50 yards away? And it's a threat right there in front of you that can be engaged, except we're around a situation to where perhaps 40, 50, 60, 70 people are around. I mean, we really need to understand the dangers of this. And I'm not blaming anybody other than the individuals that took a shot at my officers and hit them. But I am telling you that these are situations that it's very difficult for us to navigate through if you're a police officer on the street and you're doing everything you can to protect people's First Amendment rights, everything you can to protect other people's rights and maybe traveling through the area, anything that you can be doing to protect life and property. This is another layer that makes it very difficult for our police officers out there to deal with. And I hope people understand that, because it's a very tricky line for us to be able to walk. Ladies and gentlemen, we were very close to having happened what happened in NYPD with Officer Ramus and Officer Liu. We could have buried 2 police officers next week over this. And I didn't really expect the amount of agitation at times that we saw last night out of the crowd based on the news that happened yesterday. And not everybody there expressed agitation, but we certainly are always cautious. But I didn't expect, obviously, either that we would have 2 police officers shot last night. One of the officers from St. Louis County is a 41-year-old. He's a 14-year veteran of law enforcement. The Webster Groves officer is 32 years old, and he's a 5-year veteran of law enforcement. So I'll answer any questions that you have.
Chief, any update about the suspects who did this, who you are potentially looking for?
Yeah, you know, we have some perhaps leads on that. I'm going to leave that alone at the time, let the detectives work. They're still out in the field right now. In fact, the lieutenant, the sergeant, and his staff have still not had time to come into Clayton and even brief me. So we have talked to him on the phone. As you might imagine, this is the #1 priority right now of the St. Louis County Police Department, to identify these individuals. That individual are individuals who shot our police officers.
But no one is in custody?
No, ma'am.
If the shot was 125 yards away, what degree of confidence can you have that there was even association with the protest, rather than just taking the protest as an opportunity to try to shoot a cop?
Yeah, I talked to my staff about that in detail, because I had the same question about why this is. There are indications that would lead us to believe that obviously some of the folks that were there to participate last night, you know, and expressing their opinions, they were spread over a wider area than just confined, and that did extend not only to the north and the south, but also to the west. So I feel very confident that whoever did this was there for the wrong reason, not the right reason, and came there for whatever nefarious reason it was. But I do feel like there was an unfortunate association with that gathering.
Chief, you mentioned kind of this almost impossible task where you have officers standing on a line, almost like sitting ducks, and you have folks who are protesting some legitimately and others, who may be rabble rousers. How do you all, have you all thought yet about how you're going to go about this differently going forward? I mean, is there anything at all you can do differently than that? And also, can you speak to the concern from law enforcement's part that you don't want any officers to be too aggressive now or too quick to react now because of what happened?
Yeah, I would actually back up to the last part of that question. I sent a text last night out to two of my senior staff members, 2 of my lieutenant colonels, that said, listen, our burying this evening is going to be very measured. So we want to make sure we don't cross that line and do anything that we shouldn't be doing as law enforcement, and we protect those people's rights. How is it going to look differently? We have some experience in this. The county police department does, in running some of the operations last fall and during the grand jury verdict and before, and different things like that. So we're going to be exploring having to perhaps readopt those plans that we have. So one of the things with the Code 1000 plan that calls the closest 25 cars in, and then maybe a Code 2000 that causes another 25 to come, that's really not a plan, that's reactive. And I think it's incumbent upon myself as the chief to make sure that we come up with a good plan to protect the community and also to protect the police officers out there.
Is the county police considering taking over Ferguson, meaning is there a chance for existing Ferguson police officers and staff to go under the county umbrella at this point?
I guess there's that chance out there. I think the better way to answer that question is that we've not been in any sort of official talks with Ferguson regarding that issue, and that as the police chief of St. Louis County, I have an obligation to make sure that no resident in St. Louis County is without competent law enforcement, and that the police department has to make sure that we provide that to anywhere in the county, to include Ferguson. I had a question over here.
Do you expect to send any more officers out tonight to provide security around the Ferguson Police Department?
I do. I don't know if we're going to have any issues tonight, but please remember, we have a responsibility. These officers took an oath to protect life and property, and these are some of the things that we are expected to do, and it's unfortunate when these things happen. Law enforcement is at times a very dangerous proposition, but it's incumbent upon me and my staff to make sure that we're doing things to where we give our officers the best chance to succeed all the way around.
How do we keep this message back to where it was?
One of the things that I'm anxious to do right now, and I've already talked to my staff about it, is get a hold of some of my community leaders out there and talk to those folks again. I think that's critically important. There's been an assertion out there that perhaps some of the leaders that we have don't necessarily have leverage perhaps over some folks that may do certain things. But shame on us if we don't continue those conversations. And those conversations have been ongoing. I just think as the police chief, it's going to be very important to bring those community leaders back in the next day or so at the latest, and you go, hey, listen, these are my issues. I need to bring you on this. What ideas do you have as we move forward that can assist the police department and thereby assist the community? Because that's really what we're there for.
Do you happen to know what gun was used in this incident?
We feel like it's a pistol, a handgun. We recovered some shell casings up in the area. We don't know 100% yet if those are going to be the shell casings that are going to be attributed to this shooting. But we do believe it's a handgun based on the way the shots sounded, and the injuries to the police officers did not appear to be rifle wounds.
Have you learned anything from talking to any of the protesters that were there last night about, suspects possibly?
We talked to several people there. That's part of the investigation I won't go into. But it was certainly an opportunity for us to talk to some folks, and I think it would not be an overstatement to tell you that there's been several people that have been very forthright with the investigation, so that's certainly encouraging.
Chief, some of the protesters last night said this was a rowdier than normal crowd, and for a lot of fist fights, the police even had to break up among the protesters, not volunteers. Can you speak to that? I mean, was this a more violent crowd than normal?
Yeah, it was pretty rowdy. I mean, I think that's pretty clear. I think some people might have seen the news reports of fist fights and different things like that. Some things are relative. We've had nights that it's been much worse, but at the end of the day, I really did not expect last night when I first started monitoring this that it was going to spin, to the extent that it did regarding the agitation. So you try to expect those things, and but sometimes it's very difficult to figure out. We saw a report about the fact that there were rocks and bottles being thrown. I frankly have not been able to confirm that myself, so I don't know if that happened or not. But I think it is true that there was agitation within the crowd. I got this one right.
St. Louis County Police Chief John Belmar talking to reporters, describing the shooting of 2 police officers overnight in Ferguson, right outside the Ferguson Police Department. A very even, measured recounting of events as they are known at this hour, given the gravity of the situation. You heard Chief Belmar describing the injuries. One officer hit in the face. That was the 32-year-old officer, a 5-year veteran from Webster Grove. Another officer hit in the back. That's the officer he described as the 41-year-old on the force, 14 years, from St. Louis County. Both expected to survive. As to who did this, you heard the chief describe some perhaps leads, but it's early in the investigation. Not much is known at this time. Belmar said, "We came very close to having a situation similar to what transpired in New York. Thankfully, cooler heads prevailed." As for tonight, the chief said it's impossible to predict what will happen.